The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty town of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and Catherine Morgan stepped down onto soil she had never seen before, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag that held 2 dresses, a Bible, and a silver locket containing the only image she had left of her mother. It was September 1876, and the autumn air already carried the bite of the coming winter, whispering promises of harsh months ahead in this unforgiving land. Catherine had answered an advertisement placed by a rancher named Jacob Sterling, a man she had never met, whose words on paper had seemed kind enough to risk everything she had known in Philadelphia for a future she could only pray would be better than the past she was fleeing. The town itself was smaller than she had imagined, consisting of a main street lined with wooden buildings that looked as though they had been thrown together in haste. A general store stood next to a saloon, and across the street she could see a blacksmith's forge, the sound of hammer on anvil ringing through the afternoon air. Several horses were tied to hitching posts, and a few men in dusty clothes turned to stare at her with open curiosity. She smoothed her traveling dress, aware that it was wrinkled and stained from the long journey west, and clutched her carpetbag tighter as she looked around for the man who was supposed to meet her. A tall figure emerged from the shadow of the general store, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. The man walking toward her was broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore typical ranch clothing, denim trousers, a cotton shirt, and a leather vest, with a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face until he was close enough for her to see his eyes. They were the color of amber, warm and cautious at the same time, and when he stopped in front of her, he removed his hat in a gesture that seemed both polite and uncertain. "Miss Morgan." His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested years of calling orders across open range. "Yes," Catherine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Sterling," Jacob, he corrected, his gaze moving from her face to the small bag she carried. "Is that all you brought?" Catherine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and defiance both. "I brought what I have. The rest was sold to pay for my passage." She reached up to touch the locket at her throat, a nervous gesture she had not been able to break. "I have this, and I have faith that God led me here for a reason." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him seem younger than she had first thought. He could not have been more than 28 or 29, she guessed, perhaps 6 or 7 years older than her own 22 years. "That is more than enough," he said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made Catherine's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "My wagon is over here. It is about an hour's ride to the ranch." He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses, and helped her up onto the bench seat with a hand that was calloused but gentle. As they pulled away from Silver Creek, Catherine watched the small town disappear behind them, replaced by rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. The landscape was so different from anything she had known in Philadelphia, vast and open in a way that made her feel both frightened and strangely free at the same time. Jacob did not speak much as they traveled, but Catherine was acutely aware of his presence beside her. She snuck glances at his profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his hands held the reins with easy confidence. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, she asked, "How long have you had your ranch?" "5 years," Jacob replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "My father started it before the war, but he died when I was 18. I spent 3 years working other ranches, learning what I needed to know, then came back and rebuilt what had fallen apart. It is not much yet, but it is mine. What made you decide to send for a bride?" The question was bold, but Catherine needed to understand what she was walking into. Jacob was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Loneliness, I suppose, and practical need. A ranch is hard work, and it is harder doing it alone. I thought about it for 2 years before I finally placed that advertisement." He glanced at her, his amber eyes searching. What made you answer it? Catherine looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. I had nothing left in Philadelphia. My mother died last year and my father had passed when I was a child. I was working in a textile mill, barely earning enough to pay for a room in a boarding house. When I saw your advertisement, something inside me said this was the chance I had been praying for. What about your mother's family? Your friends? My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. He was Irish, and they considered that beneath them, Catherine said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. As for friends, it is hard to make friends when you work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The other girls at the mill were kind enough, but we were all too tired to be more than passing acquaintances. Jacob nodded, as though this made perfect sense to him. Out here, people care more about what you can do than where you came from. It is a hard land, but it is honest. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, and Catherine felt her heart sink. It was indeed not much, a small wooden house that looked sturdy but plain, a barn that was larger than the house, a chicken coop and several corrals. The land around it rolled away in all directions, dotted with cattle that were small specks in the distance. It was isolated in a way that made Philadelphia seem like another world entirely, but as they drew closer, Catherine noticed small touches that spoke of care. The yard was swept clean and there were curtains in the windows of the house. Someone had planted rose bushes near the front door, though they were struggling in the harsh climate. Those were my mother's, Jacob said, following her gaze. She died when I was 12. I keep trying to make them grow the way she did, but I do not have her touch with growing things. Catherine felt a pang of sympathy. I am not sure I do either, but I can try. Jacob helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment his hands lingered at her waist. Their eyes met, and Catherine saw uncertainty there that matched her own. This man was a stranger, and yet she had agreed to marry him, to share his life and his bed. The reality of it hit her like a physical weight, and she had to force herself to breathe normally. I know this is not what you are used to, Jacob said, releasing her and stepping back. But I will do my best to make you comfortable. The house has 2 bedrooms. You can take the larger one, and I will sleep in the smaller until you are ready for us to share a room. The consideration in his offer made Catherine's throat tighten. Thank you, she managed. That is kind of you. He showed her inside, and Catherine found the house was clean and simply furnished. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs and 2 armchairs near the fireplace. Through one door she could see the bedroom Jacob had mentioned, with a large bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade. The other bedroom was barely more than a closet with a narrow cot and a small chest. I have supplies for dinner, Jacob said, sounding awkward. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon. Let me, Catherine said quickly. I may not have much, but I do know how to cook. Relief crossed Jacob's face. I need to check on the stock and finish some work in the barn. I will be back in a couple of hours. After he left, Catherine stood in the center of the small house and tried not to cry. This was her life now, this isolated ranch in Montana territory, with a man she did not know. She touched her mother's locket again, drawing strength from the familiar weight of it, and then set to work. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the bedroom wardrobe and placing her Bible on the small table beside the bed. Then she went to the kitchen and began to prepare dinner with the supplies she found. Jacob had venison, which surprised her, and she made a stew with potatoes and carrots she found in a root cellar. As the stew simmered, she made biscuits from scratch, working the dough with hands that remembered her mother's teaching. The familiar motions calmed her, and by the time Jacob returned, the house smelled of cooking food and fresh bread. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. That smells incredible. It is simple fare, Catherine said, suddenly shy, but it should be filling. They sat down to eat together, and Catherine watched as Jacob took his first bite of the stew. His eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them, there was something like wonder in his expression. I have not had a meal this good since before my mother died, he said quietly. "Thank you." The praise warmed Catherine more than she had expected. They ate in silence for a while, but it was a more comfortable silence than before. When the meal was finished, Jacob helped her wash the dishes, a gesture that surprised her because she had never known a man to do such work. "We need to talk about the practical matters," Jacob said as they worked. "The preacher comes through Silver Creek once a month. He was just here last week, so it will be 3 more weeks before we can have a proper ceremony. Until then, if you want me to take you back to town and arrange for you to stay with someone there, I will understand." Catherine considered this. The thought of going back to that dusty town, of living with strangers while waiting for a wedding, held no appeal. "I came here to marry you," she said. "I do not see the point in waiting somewhere else. If it does not offend your sense of propriety, I am content to stay here." Jacob nodded slowly. "It does not offend me, but I want you to know that my offer about the bedroom stands for as long as you need it. There is no rush." That night, lying alone in the large bedroom, Catherine stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled and the wind rattled the windows. She thought about Jacob, sleeping in the small room on the other side of the wall, and wondered what kind of man he truly was. His consideration and gentleness surprised her, so different from the rough cowboys she had seen in town. She fell asleep holding her mother's locket, praying that she had made the right choice. The next morning, Catherine woke before dawn to the sound of Jacob moving around in the other room. She dressed quickly and found him preparing to go out to the barn. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Jacob looked startled. "You do not need to help with the ranch work. Taking care of the house is enough." "I did not come here to be idle," Catherine said firmly. "If I am to be your wife, then this ranch is as much my responsibility as yours. Teach me what I need to know." Something like respect flickered in Jacob's eyes. "All right, come with me." He showed her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to milk the cow that provided their dairy, and how to check the water troughs for the horses. The work was physical in a way Catherine's mill work had not been, requiring her to move and lift and carry in the fresh morning air. By the time they returned to the house for breakfast, her arms ached and her dress was dirty, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Over the next 3 weeks, a routine developed between them. They rose early and worked through the morning, then came together for midday dinner that Catherine prepared. Afternoons were spent on separate tasks, Jacob riding out to check on cattle or mending fences, while Catherine tackled the endless work of maintaining the house, washing clothes, baking bread, and preserving what food she could for the coming winter. Evenings were spent together, sometimes in silence as they mended clothes or repaired tack, sometimes in conversation as they slowly learned about each other. Catherine discovered that Jacob was a thoughtful man, slow to speak but deliberate when he did. He had been educated by his mother, who had been a schoolteacher before marrying his father, and he had a small collection of books that he treasured. In turn, Jacob learned that Catherine had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught him off guard, making him laugh in a way that transformed his serious face. The attraction between them grew gradually, built on small moments. The brush of hands as they passed dishes at dinner. The way Jacob's eyes followed Catherine as she moved around the kitchen. The times Catherine caught herself watching Jacob work, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the capable way he handled every task. They were careful with each other, both aware that they were building something that could not be rushed. 3 weeks after Catherine's arrival, they rode together into Silver Creek for the wedding. The preacher was a circuit rider named Reverend Thomas, a weathered man in his 50s who had performed more marriages in saloons and open fields than in proper churches. He met them at the small church building that also served as the schoolhouse, and 2 townspeople came to serve as witnesses. Catherine wore her best dress, a dark blue calico that had been her mother's, and she had pinned her auburn hair up in a style that made her look older and more dignified. Jacob wore a clean shirt and had shaved, and when he turned to look at her as she walked down the short aisle, the expression in his amber eyes made her breath catch. The ceremony was simple and brief. They spoke their vows in steady voices, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Jacob kissed Catherine gently, a kiss that held promise but did not demand. They signed the marriage certificate, and then they were walking out into the afternoon sunshine as husband and wife. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but the silence was charged with awareness. Catherine's mind raced with thoughts of what the night would bring, and she clasped her hands tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. Jacob seemed to sense her nervousness because he reached over and covered her hands with one of his own. "We do not have to change anything tonight," he said quietly. "The words we spoke today do not obligate you to anything you are not ready for." Catherine turned to look at him, seeing the honesty in his face. "You are a good man, Jacob Sterling," she said softly, "better than I dared hope for." When they reached the ranch, Jacob tended to the horses while Catherine went inside to prepare dinner. She had made a special effort, using precious sugar to make a pie from dried apples, wanting their wedding day to be marked by something more than the usual simple fare. They ate together at the table, talking about small things, the coming winter, the cattle Jacob wanted to buy in the spring, the improvements he hoped to make to the house. All the while, the awareness simmered between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of what lay ahead. After dinner, as the sun set beyond the mountains, Jacob stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." Catherine placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the larger bedroom. Jacob had lit candles, and the soft light filled the room with a warm glow. He turned to face her, his hands gentle as he touched her face. "I know you did not choose me out of love," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me. I promise to care for you, to protect you, and to honor you all the days of my life." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I may not have known you when I came here," she whispered, "but I am beginning to believe that God knew exactly what he was doing when he led me to you." Jacob kissed her then, a deeper kiss than the one in the church, and Catherine felt heat bloom through her body. She had been kissed before, clumsy attempts by boys in Philadelphia that had left her cold, but this was different. Jacob kissed her as though she was precious, as though he had all the time in the world and intended to savor every moment. His hands moved to the buttons of her dress, and Catherine did not stop him, her own hands exploring the breadth of his shoulders, the solid warmth of him. Their coming together was gentle and careful, Jacob attentive to her inexperience and her nervousness. There was some pain, but there was also tenderness and a growing pleasure that surprised Catherine. Afterward, lying in Jacob's arms with her head on his chest, she felt a peace she had not known in longer than she could remember. "Are you all right?" Jacob asked, his hand stroking her hair. "Yes," Catherine said, and realized it was true. "I am more than all right." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, one that included the intimacy of sharing a bed and waking together. Catherine found that she liked the feeling of Jacob's arms around her at night, the security of falling asleep to the sound of his heartbeat. Their lovemaking became less careful and more passionate as Catherine lost her shyness, and Jacob allowed himself to show the depth of his desire. They were learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's minds, with patience and growing affection. Winter came to Montana territory with a vengeance in late November. The first big snowstorm trapped them inside for 3 days, and Catherine discovered both the hardship and the unexpected pleasure of being snowed in. The hardship came from the constant battle to keep the house warm and the need to venture out in dangerous cold to care for the animals. The pleasure came from the enforced intimacy, long hours spent talking by the fire or lying together in bed, finding new ways to pass the time. "Tell me about your mother," Jacob said one evening as they lay together, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. Catherine touched her locket, as she always did when thinking of her mother. "She was beautiful and kind, and she loved my father with a fierceness that never diminished even after he died. She worked herself to exhaustion to keep me fed and clothed after he was gone, taking in sewing and washing. When she got sick last winter, she made me promise that I would not waste my life the way she felt she had wasted hers. She told me to find a way to be happy, no matter what it took. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Jacob said. I wish I could have known her. So do I, Catherine whispered. I think she would have liked you. What does your locket hold? Jacob asked. I have seen you touch it 100 times, but you have never opened it. Catherine hesitated, then reached up to unclasp the locket. She opened it carefully, revealing the small daguerreotype inside. It showed a young woman with auburn hair like Catherine's own, her face serious in the way people looked in photographs of that era, but with a softness around her eyes that suggested warmth. She was lovely, Jacob said quietly. You look like her. I hope I have more than her looks, Catherine said. I hope I have her strength too. You do, Jacob assured her. You came halfway across the country to marry a stranger, and you have met every challenge this land has thrown at you without complaint. That takes tremendous strength. The praise made Catherine feel warm inside, and she turned in Jacob's arms to kiss him. Their lovemaking that night had a sweetness to it that brought tears to Catherine's eyes, and afterward, she realized with a start that what she felt for Jacob was no longer just affection or attraction. She was falling in love with her husband. Christmas came, and Catherine did her best to make it special despite their limited resources. She baked cookies with precious sugar and spices, and she had secretly made Jacob a new shirt from fabric she had carefully hoarded. Jacob gave her a music box he had ordered from a catalog, a delicate thing that played a gentle melody when wound. Catherine cried when she opened it, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. I noticed you sometimes sing while you work, Jacob said, looking uncertain about her tears. I thought you might like this. I love it, Catherine said, wiping her eyes. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever owned besides my mother's locket. They spent Christmas Day snowed in again, and Catherine thought it might be the best Christmas she had ever had. They ate roasted chicken and potatoes, and Catherine made a cake that used up the last of their eggs until the chickens started laying more regularly again. They exchanged stories of past Christmases, Jacob telling her about the elaborate celebrations his mother had organized when he was young, Catherine describing the modest but loving holidays she had shared with her mother. That night lying in bed, Jacob said, I have something else I want to give you. He produced a small box, and when Catherine opened it, she found a simple gold wedding band. I know you have been making do without one, Jacob said. But I wanted you to have something that marks you as mine the way I am yours. Catherine slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling the weight of it. Thank you, she whispered. For this and for everything else, for being patient with me, for being kind. For being the man I needed even when I did not know what I needed. Catherine, Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to tell you something. These past months, getting to know you, being with you, it has changed me. I thought I was just looking for a practical solution to loneliness, but you have become so much more than that. I am falling in love with you. I may already be in love with you, I just needed you to know. Joy flooded through Catherine, so intense it almost hurt. I love you too, she said, the words spilling out. I think I started loving you that first day when you said my locket and my faith were more than enough. You made me feel valued in a way I never had before. Jacob pulled her close and kissed her deeply, and their lovemaking that night was different from all the times before. It was a celebration and a claiming, a physical expression of the emotional truth they had finally spoken aloud. Afterward, Catherine lay in Jacob's arms and felt completely, perfectly happy. The new year of 1877 brought a brief warm spell in January, and Jacob used the break in the weather to ride to Silver Creek for supplies. Catherine stayed behind to manage the ranch, and she felt a surge of pride at how capable she had become. She could now handle every task that needed doing, from feeding the stock to banking the fire for maximum heat. When Jacob returned 2 days later, he found the ranch running smoothly and Catherine waiting for him with a hot meal. I missed you, he said, pulling her into his arms before he had even removed his coat. I missed you too, Catherine admitted, realizing how empty the house had felt without him. It is strange how quickly you become essential to someone. I brought you something, Jacob said, producing a package from his saddlebag. Inside was a length of beautiful fabric, a soft wool in a deep green that would look stunning with Catherine's coloring. Jacob, this must have been expensive, Catherine protested, even as her fingers stroked the fabric longingly. You need a new dress, Jacob said firmly. The ones you brought are wearing out and you deserve something nice. Besides, I want to see you in something I chose, something the color of your eyes. Catherine's eyes were actually more hazel than green, but she did not correct him. Instead, she thanked him with a kiss that quickly grew heated, and they ended up in bed in the middle of the afternoon, something that felt deliciously scandalous. February brought the worst of the winter, with temperatures that dropped so low the water in the bucket by the door froze solid overnight. Jacob and Catherine worked together to keep the animals alive, sometimes going out in howling winds to break ice off water troughs or carry hay to cattle that could not reach their normal grazing. It was exhausting and dangerous work, and Catherine learned what it truly meant to be a rancher's wife. One night, after a particularly brutal day of fighting the cold, Catherine was so tired she could barely stand. Jacob helped her out of her frozen outer clothes and insisted she sit by the fire while he heated water for tea. When he brought her the steaming cup, Catherine looked up at him with eyes that stung with grateful tears. I never knew it would be this hard, she admitted, but I also never knew it would be this worthwhile. Building something together, fighting for our survival, it makes me feel alive in a way I never did in Philadelphia. You are the strongest person I know, Jacob said, sitting beside her and pulling her against his side. Most women would have given up or demanded I take them back to civilization. But you keep getting up every morning and facing whatever the day brings. I am in awe of you, Catherine Sterling. Hearing her married name on his lips still gave Catherine a thrill. She turned to kiss Jacob, tasting tea and snow on his lips, and felt desire stir despite her exhaustion. They made love slowly that night, a gentle affirmation of their bond, and Catherine fell asleep feeling blessed beyond measure. Spring came late to Montana territory, but when it finally arrived in April, it brought an explosion of life. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that quickly turned green. Wildflowers bloomed across the range, and the cattle that had survived the winter began to gain weight again. Catherine's rose bushes, which she had carefully tended through the cold months, put out new growth and even a few precious blooms. You did it, Jacob said, standing with his arm around Catherine as they looked at the roses. My mother would be pleased. Catherine had another secret that pleased her even more. Her monthly courses had not come in March or April, and she was almost certain now that she was carrying Jacob's child. She had not told him yet, wanting to be absolutely sure, but the signs were unmistakable. Her breasts were tender, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She had also noticed that her dresses were getting tighter around the middle. She chose a beautiful May evening to tell Jacob, when they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I have something to tell you, she said, her hand finding his. Jacob turned to look at her, concern flickering in his eyes at her serious tone. What is it? I am with child, Catherine said simply. I think I am about 3 months along, which would put the birth sometime in October. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, fear, and then wonder. A baby, he said, as though he could not quite believe it. We are going to have a baby. Yes, Catherine said, laughing at his stunned expression. Are you happy about it? Happy. Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. Catherine, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A baby, our baby. He placed his hand gently on her stomach, which was not yet noticeably rounded, and Catherine covered his hand with her own. I know it will be harder with a child, she said, but I think we can manage it together. We can manage anything together, Jacob said firmly. But I want you to promise me you will be careful. No more heavy lifting or dangerous work. I will not risk you or the baby. Jacob, I am not made of glass, Catherine protested. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. I do not care about other women, Jacob said. I only care about you. Please, Catherine, let me take care of you. The plea in his voice touched her, and Catherine nodded. I will be careful, she promised. But I am not going to stop being useful just because I am pregnant. The months that followed were full of preparation and anticipation. Jacob built a cradle from wood he had been saving, working on it in the evenings with careful attention to detail. Catherine sewed tiny gowns and blankets from fabric they ordered from the catalog, her hands creating clothing for a person she had not yet met but already loved. They argued good-naturedly about names, Jacob favoring traditional choices while Catherine wanted something more unusual. As summer turned to autumn, Catherine's belly swelled unmistakably, and she felt the baby move inside her, small flutters that gradually became strong kicks. The first time she felt the baby move, she grabbed Jacob's hand and placed it on her stomach so he could feel it too. The wonder on his face when he felt his child kick made Catherine fall in love with him all over again. That is our baby in there, Jacob said, his voice filled with awe. A whole person we made together. A person who is already strong-willed if the way he or she kicks is any indication, Catherine said wryly, rubbing her side where a particularly vigorous kick had landed. As her due date approached, Jacob grew increasingly nervous. He insisted on riding to Silver Creek to arrange for the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, to come stay at the ranch when Catherine's time came. Mrs. Patterson was a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered most of the babies in the county, and her presence reassured Catherine even as it highlighted the reality of what was coming. The pain started on a cold October morning, early contractions that Catherine initially mistook for the backache that had plagued her for weeks. But as they grew stronger and more regular, she knew the time had come. Jacob rode at breakneck speed to fetch Mrs. Patterson, and by the time they returned, Catherine was gripping the edge of the table and breathing through contractions that were coming every few minutes. "You are doing fine, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, helping Catherine into the bedroom. "First babies take their time, so we have a long day ahead of us." Mrs. Patterson was right about that. The labor stretched through the day and into the evening, hours of pain that seemed endless. Jacob stayed with Catherine despite Mrs. Patterson's suggestion that he might want to wait in the other room, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths. Catherine was grateful for his presence, drawing strength from the steady way he murmured encouragement and support. As night fell, the pains intensified to a level Catherine had not imagined possible. She cried out, gripping Jacob's hand so hard she was sure she must be hurting him, but he never flinched. "I am here," he kept saying. "I am right here, Catherine, you can do this." "I cannot," Catherine gasped between contractions. "It hurts too much." "You can," Jacob said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, remember? You have survived everything this land has thrown at you. You can survive this too." "Time to push, Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Patterson said, checking Catherine's progress. "With the next contraction, I want you to bear down as hard as you can." Catherine pushed and pushed and pushed until she thought she might die from the effort. Just when she was certain she had no strength left, she felt something shift and heard Mrs. Patterson say, "One more push, dear. Give me one more good push." Catherine gathered every bit of strength she had remaining and pushed with everything in her. There was a moment of intense pressure and pain and then a sudden release. A baby's cry filled the room, thin and reedy and absolutely beautiful. "You have a son," Mrs. Patterson announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy baby boy." Jacob was crying, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Catherine's arms. Catherine looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother." "He is perfect," Jacob said, his voice choked with emotion. "Catherine, you did it. You gave me a son." "We did it," Catherine corrected, looking up at her husband. "We made this miracle together." They named the baby Thomas, after Catherine's father, and the next weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Catherine was exhausted in a way she had never experienced before, but she was also happier than she had ever been. Watching Jacob with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the baby and the wonder on his face every time Thomas gripped his finger, filled Catherine's heart to overflowing. Winter came again, their second winter together, but this time they faced it as a family of 3. Jacob was endlessly patient with the disruption the baby brought to their routine, never complaining when Thomas's cries woke him in the middle of the night, or when Catherine was too tired for anything but sleep. He took over even more of the household tasks, insisting that Catherine focus on recovering and caring for their son. "You are going to spoil me," Catherine protested one evening as Jacob prepared dinner while she nursed Thomas. "Good," Jacob said, looking over at her with such love in his eyes that Catherine felt her throat tighten. "You deserve to be spoiled. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted, a home that is truly a home and now a son. I can never repay you for that." "You repay me every day," Catherine said softly. "With your love and your partnership, I came here with nothing but a locket and a prayer, and you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." As Thomas grew from a newborn into an infant who smiled and cooed, Catherine marveled at how much her life had changed in just over a year. She had arrived in Silver Creek as a desperate woman fleeing poverty and loneliness, and now she was a wife and mother with a future full of promise. The ranch was prospering under Jacob's careful management, and they had plans to expand their herd in the spring. The second spring after Catherine's arrival brought not just new life to the land, but also unexpected visitors. A family traveling west stopped at the ranch seeking water and supplies, and Catherine invited them to stay for dinner. The family consisted of a weary couple in their 30s, their 3 children, and the husband's elderly mother. They were heading to Oregon Territory, hoping to claim land under the Homestead Act. As Catherine served them the meal she had prepared, she remembered being a traveler herself, uncertain and afraid about what the future held. She made sure they had plenty to eat and sent them on their way the next morning with extra supplies packed carefully by Jacob. The woman, Mrs. Harris, hugged Catherine before they left. "Thank you for your kindness," she said. "You have given us more than food. You have given us hope that there are good people in this hard land." After they left, Jacob put his arm around Catherine as they watched the wagon disappear over the horizon. Thomas was balanced on Jacob's other hip, babbling contentedly. "You have a generous heart," Jacob said. "I remember what it was like to have nothing," Catherine replied. "If we can help people, we should." The summer of 1878 brought both joy and challenges. The ranch continued to grow, and Jacob hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. Catherine found herself managing not just her own household, but also cooking for the extra men, a task that was exhausting but satisfying. She liked feeling useful, like knowing that her work contributed directly to the success of their enterprise. Thomas was walking by then, a sturdy toddler who followed his father everywhere when Jacob was near. Watching them together, Catherine often thought about how blessed she was. Jacob was a devoted father, patient with Thomas's childish demands and endlessly willing to play or teach. He made wooden toys for their son and told him stories in the evenings, and Thomas clearly adored him. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas chase fireflies, Jacob said, "I have been thinking we should expand the house. Add another bedroom and maybe make the main room larger. We will need more space as Thomas grows and perhaps for more children if God blesses us with them." Catherine, who had suspected for a few weeks that she was pregnant again, smiled. "That sounds like a good idea." And you might want to make that extra bedroom fairly soon. Jacob looked at her, understanding dawning on his face. You are having another baby, I think so, Catherine confirmed. Probably due in early spring. Jacob let out a whoop of joy that startled Thomas, who stopped chasing fireflies to stare at his father. Then Jacob was pulling Catherine into his arms, kissing her soundly. Another baby, he said. Catherine, you make me the happiest man alive. I am fairly certain you had something to do with this, Catherine teased, but she was smiling. Despite the exhaustion she knew another pregnancy would bring, she was happy too. Their family was growing, their life was good, and she could not imagine being anywhere else. The house expansion began in September, with Jacob and his ranch hands working to add the new room and enlarge the main living space. Catherine watched the house grow and change, becoming more of a proper home. She hung curtains she had sewn herself in the new windows and planned how to arrange the furniture. The work was completed just before the first snow, and they celebrated by having a small dinner party, inviting the few neighbors who lived within riding distance. Catherine's second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because her body was better prepared for the strain. She continued to work through most of the pregnancy, though Jacob insisted she rest more and hired a young woman from town to help with the heavy household tasks. The girl, Mary, was only 16 but capable and eager to learn. Catherine enjoyed teaching her cooking and household management, and Mary's cheerful presence made the winter months less isolating. The baby, another boy they named Samuel after Jacob's father, arrived on a mild March morning in 1879. The birth was faster than Thomas's had been, and Mrs. Patterson said it was one of the easiest deliveries she had attended in years. Samuel was smaller than Thomas had been but perfectly healthy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same amber as his father's. Thomas, now a year and a half old, was fascinated by his baby brother. He wanted to touch Samuel constantly, and Catherine had to watch him carefully to make sure his enthusiastic affection did not hurt the newborn. Jacob was patient with Thomas's jealousy when it flared, taking extra time to play with his older son and assure him that he was still loved. You are a wonderful father, Catherine told Jacob one evening as she watched him building blocks with Thomas while Samuel slept in his cradle. I am trying, Jacob said. My own father was gone so much when I was young, working to build this ranch. I want to be more present for our boys. You are, Catherine assured him. They are lucky to have you. The years began to blur together in a pleasant rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the more successful ranches in the territory. Jacob's reputation as a fair and honest rancher brought him respect from his neighbors and good prices for his cattle. Catherine's skills as a homemaker became known in the area, and other women began to seek her advice on everything from cooking to preserving food to managing a household on the frontier. In 1881, when Thomas was 3 and Samuel was 2, Catherine gave birth to their first daughter. They named her Grace, and she was a beautiful baby with auburn hair like her mother's and a disposition that was sunny from the start. Jacob, who had been hoping for a daughter, was completely smitten. Catherine often found him just staring at Grace with an expression of wonder on his face. She has you wrapped around her tiny finger already, Catherine teased. Absolutely, Jacob agreed without shame. Just like her mother has me wrapped around hers. The house, which they had expanded again to accommodate their growing family, was filled with the noise and chaos of children. Catherine's days were busy beyond measure, but she thrived on the organized chaos. She had hired more help, and Mary, who was now a capable young woman of 20, stayed on as a permanent member of the household. Catherine valued her assistance and her companionship, and the two women became genuine friends despite the gap in their ages. One afternoon in the summer of 1882, Catherine was working in her garden, which had finally begun to thrive after years of patient cultivation. The rosebushes her mother-in-law had planted were flourishing now, and Catherine had added vegetables and herbs. She was weeding around the tomato plants when she heard a rider approaching fast. Jacob came around the corner of the house at a gallop, and Catherine's heart jumped with alarm. He only rode that fast when something was wrong, but when he dismounted, she saw that his face was alight with excitement, not fear. "The railroad is coming through Silver Creek," he announced. "They are building a depot there, and it will be completed by next summer." "Catherine, do you know what this means?" Catherine straightened up, pushing her hair back from her face. "We will have easier access to markets." "Yes, and to supplies and to the rest of the world," Jacob said. He pulled her into his arms, despite the fact that she was dirty from gardening. "The isolation is ending. Our children will grow up with opportunities we never had." Catherine leaned against her husband, looking past him to where Thomas and Samuel were playing in the yard while Grace napped in the house. She thought about how far they had come from that first day when she had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a locket and a prayer. They had built a life together, a real life filled with love and family and purpose. "Do you ever regret answering my advertisement?" Jacob asked as though reading her thoughts. "Never," Catherine said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You told me that first day that my locket and my faith were more than enough, and you were right. But what I did not know then was that you would give me so much more in return. You gave me a home, a family, and a love I never dared dream of. How could I ever regret that?" Jacob kissed her, a long, sweet kiss that still made Catherine's heart race even after all their years together. "I am the one who should be grateful," he said. "You took a chance on a lonely cowboy and you transformed his life. I love you, Catherine Sterling. I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Catherine replied, her hand going to the locket she still wore every day. "I thank God for leading me to you." The next years brought continued growth and prosperity. The railroad did indeed come to Silver Creek, transforming the small frontier town into a more substantial community. A proper school was built, and Catherine was thrilled to send Thomas there when he turned 6. The teacher was a young woman from Boston, and Catherine made a point of befriending her, knowing how lonely it could be to be a stranger in this land. In 1884, Catherine gave birth to another daughter, Elizabeth, and in 1887, their youngest child, a boy they named Matthew, completed their family. The house, which had been expanded twice more, was bursting with life and laughter. Catherine sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of 5 children, but she never felt unhappy. Each child was a blessing, and watching them grow and develop their own personalities was a constant source of joy. Jacob was successful enough now that he could afford to hire a foreman to manage the day-to-day operations of the ranch, which gave him more time with his family. He took his sons out to teach them ranching, and he was patient with their mistakes and enthusiastic about their successes. With his daughters, he was gentle and indulgent, but he also taught them to ride and to handle themselves in the demanding environment of ranch life. "You are raising strong children," Catherine told him one evening as they sat together on the porch, a rare moment of quiet in their busy lives. "Children who know how to work and how to love." "We are raising them together," Jacob corrected. "You are the heart of this family, Catherine. You set the tone for everything. Our children are kind and hardworking because they see you being kind and hardworking every day." Catherine felt her eyes sting with happy tears. "I never imagined my life could be this full," she said. "When I answered your advertisement, I was hoping for basic security and maybe companionship. I never dared hope for real love." "I did not dare hope for it either," Jacob admitted. "I thought I was looking for a housekeeper and perhaps a business partner. Instead, I found the love of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built a life on together. In the distance, Catherine could hear the children playing before bedtime, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. She reached over and took Jacob's hand, and he squeezed her fingers gently. The turn of the century brought changes to Montana Territory, which was moving toward statehood. Jacob was involved in local politics now, serving on various committees and working to improve the infrastructure of their region. Catherine supported his efforts while managing their large household and becoming increasingly involved in community work. She helped establish a women's charitable society that assisted new settlers and provided support for families in need. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Jacob gave Catherine a new locket, a beautiful gold piece with intricate engraving. "I know you will always treasure your mother's locket," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "But I wanted you to have something from me that you could pass down to our daughters. Inside, I put pictures of our children." Catherine opened the locket to find tiny photographs of all 5 children, carefully arranged. Tears flowed freely down her face. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Jacob, thank you for this and for 20 years of happiness." "The happiness has been mutual," Jacob said, pulling her close. "You made a lonely house into a home full of love. You made a solitary man into a husband and father. You made my life worth living, Catherine." They renewed their vows privately that night, speaking the same words they had said 2 decades earlier in Silver Creek's small church. But the words meant so much more now, weighted with years of shared experience, with trials weathered and joys celebrated together. Their lovemaking that night had the passionate intensity of youth combined with the deep intimacy of long familiarity. And Catherine fell asleep in Jacob's arms, feeling blessed beyond measure. As their children grew toward adulthood, Catherine and Jacob began to see the fruits of their labor in ways that filled them with pride. Thomas, their oldest, proved to have a natural gift for ranching and announced his intention to stay and work the land alongside his father. Samuel was more scholarly, and they sent him to school in Helena with hopes that he might become a lawyer or businessman. Grace, their eldest daughter, grew into a lovely young woman who shared her mother's compassion and her father's determination. In 1901, when Thomas was 23, he married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a sensible young woman named Margaret who fit seamlessly into the Sterling family. Catherine helped plan the wedding, which was held at the ranch and attended by seemingly everyone in the county. As she watched her son exchange vows with his bride, Catherine thought about her own wedding day, how simple and uncertain it had been. She reached for Jacob's hand and he squeezed it, understanding without words what she was thinking. "We started something good," he whispered. "Look what we built." Catherine looked around at the gathering, at the prosperous ranch, at the friends and neighbors who had come to celebrate with them, at her children who were healthy and happy. And she silently thanked God for the path that had led her here. From a desperate decision to answer an advertisement from a stranger to this moment of joy and celebration, it had been an improbable journey, but one she would not change for anything. The early years of the 20th century brought more changes. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and the territory that had seemed so wild and lawless when Catherine first arrived was becoming increasingly civilized. Telephones came to Silver Creek, which was now a proper town with paved streets and electric lights. The ranch itself modernized, with new equipment and methods that made the work less backbreaking, but some things did not change. Catherine still wore both her lockets every day, her mother's and the one Jacob had given her. She still found joy in simple things, watching the sunrise over the mountains, harvesting vegetables from her garden, sitting on the porch with Jacob in the evenings. She still felt grateful every single day for the life she had been given. In 1905, when Catherine was 51 and Jacob was 58, they became grandparents for the first time. Thomas and Margaret's son was born on a beautiful spring morning, and they named him Jacob, after his grandfather. Catherine held her grandson in her arms and felt a profound sense of continuity, of life flowing forward through generations. "You are going to spoil that baby," Jacob teased, watching as Catherine cooed over their grandson. "That is a grandmother's prerogative," Catherine replied, not looking up from the baby's face. "Besides, you spoiled our own children terribly. I am just following your example." Jacob laughed, and the sound was full of contentment. He came to stand beside Catherine, looking down at the baby who bore his name. "I never thought I would live to see this day," he admitted. "When I was a young man alone on this ranch, I could not imagine having a family, let alone grandchildren." "God had plans for you," Catherine said softly. "Plans that involved a desperate woman with nothing but a locket and a prayer answering your advertisement." "Best decision I ever made, placing that advertisement," Jacob said, "and best decision you ever made, answering it." Samuel graduated from school and decided to return to Montana, though not to ranch. He opened a law practice in Helena and quickly made a name for himself as an honest and skilled attorney. Grace married a doctor and moved to Billings, where her husband established a practice. Elizabeth showed artistic talent and went to study art in Chicago, supported by her proud parents who wanted their children to follow their dreams. Matthew, the youngest, was still deciding his path, but he showed promise in whatever he attempted. As Catherine and Jacob moved into their 60s, they gradually stepped back from the most demanding work. Thomas and Margaret took over the primary management of the ranch, though Jacob still spent hours each day involved in operations. Catherine focused more on her grandchildren, of which there were now 5, and on her community work. She had become a respected figure in Silver Creek, known for her wisdom and her generosity. One evening in 1910, when they had been married for 34 years, Catherine and Jacob were sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Catherine was 66 now, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her face lined with years of sun and laughter. Jacob was 69, his dark hair completely gray, his body still strong but moving with the caution of age. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Catherine asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I said your locket and your faith were more than enough," Jacob replied without hesitation. "I remember every detail of that day. You looked so scared and so brave at the same time, standing there in your travel-worn dress with that little carpet bag." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into. You could have been anyone, kind or cruel, honest or deceptive, but you turned out to be the best man I ever could have hoped for." "I was terrified too," Jacob confessed. "I had no idea how to be a husband. I was afraid I would disappoint you or that you would realize you had made a terrible mistake and leave." Catherine laughed softly. "Where would I have gone? I had no money and no family to return to. You were stuck with me whether you wanted to be or not." "I wanted to be," Jacob said seriously. "From that first moment I wanted you to stay, and then I fell in love with you and I wanted you to stay forever." "Forever is not quite long enough," Catherine said, reaching for his hand. "I want more than forever with you, Jacob Sterling." They sat in silence again, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of Thomas and Margaret putting their children to bed, the same sounds that had filled this house for decades, as Catherine and Jacob had raised their own family. It was a symphony of domesticity and love, and Catherine thought there was no sweeter music in all the world. "I need to tell you something," Jacob said suddenly, his voice serious. "I have been having some pains in my chest. The doctor in town thinks it is my heart. He says I need to slow down, take things easier." Catherine's hand tightened on his. "How long have you been having these pains?" "A few months," Jacob admitted. "I did not want to worry you." "Jacob Sterling, we have been married for 34 years. We have faced everything together." "You do not get to keep things from me now," Catherine said, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. "You will slow down and you will take care of yourself. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Jacob said meekly, but he was smiling. Still bossy after all these years. "Someone has to keep you in line," Catherine said, but her voice was shaking. "I am not ready to lose you, Jacob. I will never be ready to lose you." "You are not going to lose me," Jacob promised, pulling her close. "I am too stubborn to die before I have spoiled all our grandchildren and seen our great-grandchildren if God grants us that blessing." Jacob kept his promise to slow down. stepping back completely from active ranching and focusing instead on advising Thomas and enjoying his family. The pains in his chest became less frequent with rest, and the doctor said he could live for many more years if he was careful. Catherine watched over him like a hawk, making sure he did not overexert himself and that he ate properly. The years continued to pass, marked by births and marriages, by harvests and seasons. More grandchildren arrived, and Catherine and Jacob's family tree grew increasingly complex. Sunday dinners at the ranch became legendary gatherings, with children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and laughter. Catherine still cooked for these occasions, though she had help now, and she loved watching Jacob at the head of the table, surrounded by the family they had created together. In 1915, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from across the state. Friends, neighbors, business associates, and family all came to honor the couple who had built one of the most successful ranches in Montana and raised a family that was well respected in the community. Speeches were made praising their hard work, their integrity, and their devotion to each other. When it was Catherine's turn to speak, she stood with Jacob beside her and looked out at the crowd. 40 years ago, I arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but a carpetbag, a locket from my mother, and a prayer that I was making the right decision, she said. I was met by a man I had never seen before, a stranger who would become my husband. He told me that what I brought was more than enough, and in that moment, I knew I had found a good man. What I did not know was that I had found the love of my life, my partner, my best friend. These 40 years have not always been easy. We have faced hardship and loss, struggled through harsh winters and difficult times. But we have faced everything together, and that has made all the difference. Jacob Sterling, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that I answered your advertisement. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and when Catherine sat down, Jacob kissed her in front of everyone, a passionate kiss that drew cheers and applause. I am the lucky one, he said when they finally broke apart. I placed an advertisement hoping for a housekeeper and got a queen instead. As they moved into their 70s, Catherine and Jacob's pace of life slowed even further. They spent more time in quiet companionship, reading together or simply sitting and watching the world around them. Jacob's heart condition was stable but chronic, and Catherine was always aware that their time together was precious. She had developed arthritis that made her hands ache, especially in cold weather, but she refused to complain. They had been blessed with long lives and good health for most of those lives, which was more than many people could say. On a spring morning in 1920, Catherine woke to find Jacob had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 83 years old, and his heart had simply given out. Catherine held his still warm hand and wept, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. Despite knowing this day would come eventually, she was not prepared for the reality of it, for the emptiness of a bed that had been shared for 44 years. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the life Jacob had lived and the respect he had earned. Catherine sat surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace even as her heart was breaking. They buried Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot he had chosen years earlier because the view was beautiful. In the days and weeks after Jacob's death, Catherine struggled with grief that was nearly overwhelming. She had lost her mother, but that had been different. Jacob had been her partner, her other half. Without him, she felt incomplete in a way that was physically painful. She moved through her days mechanically, doing what needed to be done but finding no joy in any of it. It was Grace who finally broke through her grief. Her daughter came to visit and found Catherine sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at nothing. "Mother," Grace said gently, "Daddy would not want this. He would want you to live, not just exist." "I do not know how to live without him," Catherine whispered. "He was everything to me." "He was not everything," Grace corrected softly. "You still have us, your children and grandchildren." You still have the ranch that you and Daddy built together. You still have your faith. And you still have the memories of 44 years of love. Daddy gave you so much, Mother. Honor that gift by continuing to live fully." Catherine looked at her daughter, seeing the wisdom in her eyes, and realized Grace was right. Jacob had given her an extraordinary life, and the best way to honor that was to continue living it. She could not bring him back, but she could carry him with her in her heart, in her memories, in the legacy they had built together. Slowly, Catherine began to heal. She would never stop missing Jacob, would never stop reaching for him in the night only to find the bed empty, but she learned to live with the loss. She found purpose in her family, taking an active interest in her grandchildren's lives and even her great-grandchildren, for several of her grandchildren were now married with children of their own. She continued her community work, finding satisfaction in helping others. She also spent time with Jacob in her own way, visiting his grave regularly and talking to him as though he could hear her. She told him about family news, about the ranch, about her days. It brought her comfort to feel connected to him still, even if only in spirit. One afternoon, sitting by Jacob's grave, Catherine opened the locket he had given her on their 20th anniversary. The photographs of their children as young people looked back at her, frozen in time. She thought about all they had accomplished together, all the love they had shared and created. "We did well, my love," she said aloud. "We built something that will last long after we are both gone. I will see you again someday, but until then, I will keep living the life you gave me. I will keep wearing these lockets and remembering that faith and love really are more than enough." Catherine lived to be 89 years old, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1933, surrounded by family. In the years after Jacob's death, she had become the matriarch of a large and thriving family, respected and loved by all who knew her. Her children and grandchildren mourned her deeply, but they also celebrated a life well lived, a life that had started with a desperate gamble and transformed into a love story that spanned nearly 5 decades. They buried Catherine beside Jacob on the hill overlooking the ranch, and on her headstone they inscribed the words Jacob had spoken to her on the day they met. "That is more than enough." The 2 lockets, her mother's and Jacob's, were passed down to Grace, who treasured them as symbols of love and faith that had sustained her mother through everything. The Sterling Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management and eventually under his children's management. The house that had started as a simple cabin grew and changed over the years, but it remained the heart of the family. On Sunday afternoons, when the family gathered for dinner as they still did, someone would inevitably tell the story of how Catherine and Jacob met, how a mail-order bride with nothing but a locket and a prayer found a cowboy who said that was more than enough. It became the family's founding myth, a love story that reminded each generation that faith and courage, combined with love and partnership, could overcome any obstacle and build something lasting and beautiful. And so the legacy lived on, not just in the land and the ranch, but in the values Catherine and Jacob had instilled in their family. Hard work and integrity, compassion and generosity, the belief that love was the foundation on which everything else was built. They had started with nothing and created everything, 2 lonely souls who found each other across the vast distance of a continent and built a love that would echo through generations. The Lockets remained in the family, passed from mother to daughter, each generation adding their own stories to the legacy. And always, when a young woman in the Sterling family faced uncertainty or fear, she would touch the Lockets and remember her ancestor Catherine, who had stepped off a stagecoach in Montana territory with nothing but hope and faith, and found a love that changed everything.